So, I have a story to tell, and I'm not sure if you all will believe me, but I have learned to not talk about skinwalkers, which in my defense, I'm not exactly talking about them. I'm just giving you all a warning. So I'll get straight to the point. Me and a group of friends decided to go camping at the Kaibab National Forest in Arizona. We were gathered around the campfire, talking about various topics, and of course, being right next to the Navajo Nation. The subject of skinwalkers and other things regarding the Navajo people was brought up. Questions as to why they're so secretive about these things. I know you all heard the tales and the stories about not sharing anything about them, and how they don't like to talk about skinwalker stuff with people outside the res. Anyways, we were surrounded by a dense forest, and looking at the stars above us, everything was so beautiful. As we started drinking and smoking, and the night deepened, my friend Cliff excused himself to step into the woods to go take a leak. And well, I know most guys know, but if you're a lady reading this, it doesn't take long to use the bathroom for us men. So anyways, a few minutes turned into 5, and then 10, and then 15, and it wasn't like him to be gone for so long. I mean, I know alcohol makes you go to the bathroom a lot, and we're not really into pulling pranks into each other. So armed with a flashlight, I ventured into the trees, the same direction that I saw Cliff go. As I was walking, I was also calling for him. I walked for about 2 or 3 minutes into the trees, and there was nothing. There was only silence. There were no noises from anything, no insects, nothing. Then, I heard it. His voice. I knew it was him. I followed the sound and I started shouting for him. I thought he might have been hurt or something. So I kept calling out to him, and I kept hearing his voice. Over here. Finally, I stumbled into a clearing where I saw Cliff standing still, just looking up at the stars above him. "Hey, check this out, man," Cliff mentioned, motioning and pointing to the sky. "What the hell are you doing, Cliff?" I approached, with my flashlight aimed at his back. As I was coming out the tree line to him, that's when I felt something on my shoulder from behind. I jumped, and that's when I saw Cliff. Confusion set in. I shined my flashlight to the other person who I thought was Cliff, but when I looked at him, he was facing us. It was undeniably humanoid, but horribly wrong. Its eyes, unblinking, it reflected the light without any sign of life. Its mouth was wide open, and as the beam of light hit its face, its movements became erratic, jerking towards us at a slow speed. Stumbling but trying to walk like a human would, panic surged through me and Cliff. We turned and fled through the darkness, driven by fear. We didn't stop to look back until we reached the safety of our campsite. We started shouting to the other two before we even got there. As we got to them, we started screaming that we gotta go. And so I don't even know if we packed up everything, but we got the fuck out of there. I have no idea what the hell that was. But after that encounter, we decided to never go camping again. Me and my friends have talked about what we possibly encountered that night, and we done research, and we all came to the conclusion that it must have been a skinwalker. So let this be the last time I ever mention this word itself. I don't mess with skinwalkers anymore. I don't talk about them. I know they might be trending right now with TikTok, but be careful. There's a reason the Navajo people don't talk about these things. Anyways, that's pretty much it. Like I said, you might not believe me, but that I'll leave up to you. I love summer. It's my favorite time of the year. I know some people prefer a different season, and those other ones are great too. But for me, there's just something relaxing about a warm summer day. Almost every year or so, a few of my friends and I have a little get together. We all take some time off from work and plan some sort of event. Last year, was Eric's world-famous barbecue party. Everything was great until Eric set a stack of paper plates on fire, and those blew into the various table covers we had arranged. We managed to curtail the fires before they had time to spread any further, but that didn't stop the fire department from showing up anyway. The year before that, Jimmy invited us over to his house for a pool party. He has a very nice in-ground pool, but none of us actually swam in it. We mostly just hung around his minibar, just drinking and chatting away. Nothing outrageous happened during that party, except for Eric's failed cannonball attempt. I could go on and on about all the events we experienced in the past, but I'm here to talk about what happened during my event last month. Like I mentioned previously, we had all taken some time off work, and it was my turn to decide what we would all do. We usually didn't take turns choosing like this, but no one seemed to come up with a different plan. I had been browsing through different destination spots and activities around my area. After searching for around an hour or two, I stumbled across a rather interesting post. Someone was renting out a lake house about an hour's drive north. Looking through the photos and glancing over the price, I knew right away this is what I wanted to do. I called the place and I got it rented out for the weekend. The woman on the phone sounded very excited about me renting the property. After finalizing everything, I called everyone else and told them my plan. They were all almost as excited as the woman. Eric wanted to bring his grill with him so he could barbecue one day, and Jimmy brought some fishing gear so we could lounge by the lake. Our other friend Peter tagged along with us as well. He isn't a very outdoors type of person, but he still offered to come with us. We each arrived at the lake house about mid-afternoon. The sun wasn't quite setting yet, which was good as it gave us a bit of time to survey the area and inspect the house itself. The house was much larger than I expected for the price I paid to rent it. It seemed like I had gotten a really good deal. It was between the massive lake and the crowded woods behind it. Only a solitary dirt trail cuts through the tree line, leading to and from the house itself. Eric was already unloading his grill not 5 minutes after he arrived, while Jimmy, Peter, and I entered the house. The inside of the house was very rustic, but I knew this much from the photos. Different types of mounted animals on the high walls. The living room area was quite large. It looked almost like a recreation hall. A wooden staircase wrapped along one edge, leading up to multiple bedrooms. An expansive kitchen took up the other half of the bottom floor, as well as a decent-sized bathroom. It looked like this place was designed for big groups of people to just enjoy and have fun. After exploring the house for a bit, I went outside and took in the surroundings. It was such a peaceful evening as I stood there taking in the fresh air. That's when I noticed something strange. Apart from Eric trying to mess around with his grill, there was no sound coming from the forest. I couldn't hear any birds, animals, or even insects. I could barely hear the sound from the lake nearby. Even though it was weird, I tried not to think too much of it. An hour or so passed by, and after eating some burnt steaks that Eric so graciously made for us, we each retired to our bedrooms. Sleeping in a new place always made me feel a bit nervous. I may be the only one, but whenever I stay in a hotel or at a friend's place, it always takes me forever to fall asleep, at least during the first night. This isn't really a major issue, as it doesn't keep me from traveling. The bedrooms were quite nice, minimal, yet decent. It had a small wooden frame bed, a stout dresser, and a nightstand with a small lamp. And on the far wall was a long window that overlooked the trees and the lake. I was lying there, letting my mind wander as my eyes danced around my room. I wasn't even staring at anything. I was just trying to take in my surroundings so I could fall asleep more easily next time. Minutes slowly ticked by. and I started to feel my eyelids close before a faint of movement out of the corner of my eye caused me to open them once again. I couldn't be sure, but I thought for a split second I saw someone standing outside my window. But that couldn't be possible, as the bedrooms were on the second floor, and it was a straight drop down to the dirt below. My eyes locked onto the window, but after focusing for a bit, there was nothing out there. The next day, we all got up bright and early. There wasn't a whole lot to do aside from wandering around the property, so that's what I did. Eric was already prepping some food, while Pete and Jimmy had started day drinking. I stood outside the wooden porch with a cup of coffee, looking out to the tree line nearby. I once again let my eyes drift around as I sipped my coffee, and once again, there wasn't any sound, which I still thought was strange. I wonder why it was so quiet in the woods, a place that is often filled with the sounds of life. As my eyes drifted, I spotted a bit of movement in the distance. It looked like something large, moving quickly through the trees. I thought it might have been a bear, but before I could adjust my gaze, whatever it was had disappeared further into the trees. The rest of the day was uneventful. We spent most of the time down near the lake, drinking and fishing. Eric had made us some burgers, which actually weren't terrible, and before we knew it, the sun had faded. We all went to our bedrooms for the night, and I didn't have much trouble falling asleep this time around. 10 minutes after I had drifted off, I was startled awake by the sounds of screaming. My eyes cracked open and I sat up, looking around in the darkness. It took me a minute to recognize the voice. It was Jimmy. As I opened my bedroom door, I saw Eric opening his as well. We each gave each other a confused look before going to Jimmy's door and knocking. After receiving no answer, I opened his door. "Jimmy?" I called out. Jimmy was sitting on the floor, wide-eyed, covered in sweat. I asked him what was wrong. However, he wouldn't turn to look at me. His eyes seemed to be fixed on something else. Eric and I both glanced over in unison towards his window, and that's when I heard Eric, over my shoulder, shout, "What the fuck is that?" I didn't say anything. I just felt my muscles tighten. On the other side of Jimmy's window was a figure. It wasn't anything I had ever seen before. With the faint bit of moonlight outside, I could just barely see its face. I know this is gonna sound very weird, but its face was almost dog-like in appearance. It had a long nose and beady, hollow eyes. From what I could tell, its body was completely hairless. I'm not sure if it was just the moonlight outside or what, but its skin was a dark gray color with a bluish tint to it. Its eyes continuously darted from each of us, almost like someone hopped up on caffeine. It was creepy how jittery this thing was. It felt like an eternity for all of us sitting there, watching this thing watch us. Then, it started to descend from the window. Jimmy and Eric didn't move a muscle, yet for some reason, I felt drawn to the window. I peered outside and I saw it. Despite its massive size, it crawled down the side of the house like a spider. It crawled on all fours as it made its way to the ground below. Its hands were strangely human in appearance, but its hind legs were those of an animal, like a dog or maybe a wolf. Its head turned back to look up at the house, and I could just faintly see its beady eyes, darting around before it took off into the woods, disappearing beyond the darkened tree line. Eric, Jimmy, and I all sat there, staring at each other for a few moments before Peter came stumbling into the room, asking what the hell was going on. None of us said anything, but we all did end up sleeping in the same bedroom for the rest of the evening. The following day, as we all packed up to leave, I couldn't help but stare at the strange footprints in the dirt, leading off into the forest. What made me nervous wasn't the fact that these footprints confirmed that what we saw that night was real, but there were at least 10 more identical yet separate tracks leading off in various directions. It's been close to a month since that, and I've been trying my best to forget about the whole event. I still have no idea what that thing was, but I doubt I'll be renting any more houses by a forest. I never really knew my grandma's brother well. All I can remember is that he was a real energetic man who lived on the hill where my grandparents resided, in the Navajo Res, not far from the Chaco Wash. My grandma's brother used to reside a couple of miles north of my grandparents' place. His dwelling, more like a shack, sat on the outskirts of the Badlands. When we were young, we were instructed to steer clear of this place because it was considered evil. I never questioned why. I just accepted the warning and avoided the area. As time went by, my grandma's brother passed away under strange circumstances. He was found dead in his house. Even though he would occasionally visit my grandparents, his absence for a few days was unusual. My older uncle went to his house and discovered his lifeless body. What was strange was the hasty funeral arrangements that followed. Normally, in Navajo tradition, funerals are held on the fourth day after the person's passing, but in this case, the funeral was conducted immediately, without even informing the family. Curiosity led me to sneak over to his house to see what it looked like inside before it was torn down, as per my grandmother's request. The inside of the house felt eerie. It was a one-room, shed-like structure with faded and sun-bleached wooden boards for walls. The boards didn't fit tightly, allowing sunlight to filter in, illuminating the floating dust particles. The bed was modest, adorned with a green army blanket. There weren't that many decorations, mostly old shearing tools and knives, with no photographs in sight. An old wood stove and a small table occupied the space, alongside two crates at the far end of the room. One wooden crate laid open, revealing its contents, while the other, made of metal, was locked. After my brief exploration, I left the house, noting its vantage point, overlooking the Badlands to the west. Several years passed, and my older uncle decided to build his dream house on the exact site where my grandmother's brother had lived. Despite my grandmother's concerns about the location, my uncle was determined to proceed with the construction. He envisioned a single-story ranch-style house, equipped with all modern stuff, which was actually very rare on the res. The construction began, and everything seemed to progress easy at first. However, strange occurrences soon began to fall on the workers. Tools would go missing, and they said that there would be shadows moving within the house, and blood was discovered smeared on the walls. Even stranger were the tracks found in the sand around the house, leading from the west towards the Badlands. My uncle, an experienced hunter, couldn't identify these tracks, so he looked for help with my grandpa, who also found them perplexing. Eventually, my grandma intervened, recognizing the signs of a skinwalker. She instructed my uncle on the necessary precautions, and work on the house stopped until this issue could be resolved. Despite being careful, strange events continued to happen in the house, but my uncle pressed on. He eventually completed the house, and even yet, the disturbances persisted, driving his family to discomfort and fear. Even my grandmother's attempts to calm the spirits seemed futile against whatever forces were at play. On one specific evening, my cousins and I stayed over, and we experienced firsthand the strange nature of this house. The generator was shut off, and then strange noises echoed through the darkness, and it almost felt like some presence seemed to stalk us from the shadows. Only the intervention of my grandparents, armed with traditional remedies and fierce determination, brought us relief from all of this. Another incident involved my younger cousin. She was alone in the truck outside, and she said as she looked to the west side of the house, she saw a pale, humanoid figure peering down at her with dark, soulless eyes. Her screaming alerted the family to come outside, but this creature had vanished before they could confront it. Even with my grandmother, a woman of great strength, she had vowed to confront whatever was there and expel it from the house. My grandma was very traditional and practiced native medicine. She also used sacred crystals to find and heal people. While looking into her crystals, she would also practice reading people's hands. There's been a few instances where she has been used to locate missing people and also found the circumstances of the way the person died. She also had knowledge of the evil way, the dark practice of witchcraft. In need of medicine, my grandma had acquired a few secret items and would seek help from another medicine man. They both went into the house and began a ceremony to expel whatever was in it. They went into each room, blessing them with sage and sealing them with ash. When they finally went into the master bedroom, the medicine man started to vomit and bleed from the nose. My grandma said that she had a nauseous feeling and felt dizzy, almost fainting. They both retreated from the room and closed the door, sealing it with ash. The medicine man said the room was the source of evil, attracting evil spirits, including skinwalkers. He said he would try to pinpoint where the evil was coming from, but would need to go in alone. He began by lighting up a medicine bundle, taking bitter root, and marking his forehead with ash before entering the room. He described the room as very cold, feeling the presence of numerous spirits in the closet. Upon opening the closet, he saw a black mist on the floor, swirling like the eye of a black hurricane. He began the ceremony to close the portal, but was met with resistance. The medicine man heard a voice from the swirling mass, telling him that only the one who summoned the evil could close the portal. However, he continued the ceremony, and the mass started to diminish and eventually disappeared. Blessing the room with sage and corn pollen, he attached the burnt log to the top of the interior of the closet and sealed the door with ash. He warned my grandma that whatever was summoned was evil and too strong to keep under control, and so his recommendation was that my uncle abandon the house. Despite the warnings, my aunt, her boyfriend, and their 3-year-old son moved into the house, believing it to be a perfectly good place to save money on rent payments. However, they soon encountered paranormal experiences. One evening, my aunt heard footsteps walking down the hallway, followed by something crawling into bed with her and her son. Whatever it was, quickly got out of bed, threw off the covers, and stepped on her boyfriend's neck, causing him to choke for air. They then decided to leave the house immediately, leaving their belongings behind. Later, my younger uncle Max and his friend Leo decided to spend the night at the house to investigate. While they were there, they experienced a terrifying encounter with different spirits, including that of a little girl and a faceless figure, making them flee the house in fear. Even after these encounters, the house has remained vacant, with strange occurrences continuing to happen, such as lights turning on despite the lack of electricity. Despite the warnings and strange events, the house stands abandoned, with its curtains drawing open, as if someone is still inside, watching. This is my true Skinwalker story. At the time of this experience, I had no knowledge, nor had I ever heard about a skinwalker. I was 19 years old, and I lived in Phoenix, Arizona, with my parents while attending community college. My sister-in-law had asked me to go with her to Tuba City, Arizona, to visit with her mother and pick up some papers. Her mother was a school teacher there on the Navajo Res. We would be staying there overnight. Her mother lived in one of those small government houses on the res. There were about 3 or 4 houses near her on a small paved street. Except for a few buildings near there, it was pretty isolated. My niece and nephew were with us, and we'll call my sister-in-law Mary, my nephew Mike, and my niece Amy. Mike was only 10 years old, and Amy was 9. It was early evening when we arrived in Tuba City. We had stopped at a fast food restaurant on the way to pick up dinner to go. After arriving at the house, we all laid together at a small kitchen table. We talked and visited a while before going into the small living room to watch TV. There wasn't a lot to do there, so Mary and I decided we would take a night drive and explore around the res. I know what you're thinking. It's a very bad idea, or a stupid idea. We drove around for about an hour and a half. Surprisingly, nothing weird happened. We were just laughing, talking, and listening to music as we drove up and down the dirt roads. After a while, we decided to head back. When arriving back home, we stayed up a little bit later, and then we decided it was time to go to bed. I slept in a small back bedroom on a twin bed next to a window with blinds. My nephew Mike slept on the floor in a sleeping bag in the same room. Mary and Amy were in the other room down the hallway. During the night, I was awakened by some strange, scratchy noises outside the window by my bed. It sounded like something was making long, slow clawing sounds down the window, like when someone runs their nails down a chalkboard. I am a light sleeper, so this of course woke me up. I whispered out loud to my nephew Mike to wake up, asking him if he was hearing the same thing I was. Mike was sleepy and groggy, being awakened from a deep slumber, so he seemed confused at first. I asked him again if he had heard the scratching noise, but he didn't answer. He was just out of it. He then laid back down and was out like a light. I was perplexed and a little scared. I thought to myself maybe it was just a stray cat or dog, but I couldn't figure it out. I did, however, have no indication to look out that window, so I just lay there listening. After a few minutes, the clawing stopped. I must have fallen asleep because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I mentioned this at the kitchen table during breakfast, but no one seemed very interested. We left later that afternoon, and I never even thought about it again. 6 months later, I was attending one of my college courses. The teacher was lecturing us about different legends and stories of the Navajo people. He touched on the stories of evil medicine men, or witches, that are called skinwalkers. He began telling us that they are very dangerous and harmful. They have the ability to turn into or disguise themselves as any animal. They could take the form of a coyote, wolf, or even a bear. They also been known to follow people home at night. That's why you should never be out on the res after dark. You're never supposed to make eye contact with the skinwalker, because they can actually possess your soul. You should never talk about them, because you can draw them to you. They can cause issues and bring evil into your life. An icy chill went down my spine. I remember that night I had spent on the res. I wonder if a skinwalker had followed Mary and me home that night after our drive. The realization that a skinwalker had targeted us fills me with fear. I think of this often, and I'm so glad I didn't look out the window that night. I'm also haunted by the fact that there was just a very thin pane of glass separating me from such an evil thing. And now, I guess I know why no one in the family wanted to talk about it. The year was 2004 in South California. I was 16 years old, Native American, Navajo. My grandmother was a medicine woman at such a young age. She was in the process of teaching me her ways. When I was a child, she always told me not to be afraid of anything I might see, and that I was special. Ever since then, it was like a gate opened in me, and I began to see things and feel them sometimes, cries and screams like whispers in my ears. This causes me to have to wear earbuds to sleep, playing some music in order to drown out everything and just sleep. I've been through a lot of hauntings as I was a kid, until this day in 2021, but this haunting was one that has upset me, as something attacked my mother. One day, my mother came to me, and I could see she looked so drained, like she hadn't gotten good sleep in a long time. I asked her what was wrong. When I noticed that she didn't seem scared, she said to me, "I'm terrified to sleep. Every night, I awake, and I can't move at all. And then all of a sudden, I see something dark, slowly crawling from the edge of the bed by my feet, climbing up my legs all the way to me. All I can do was cry. I feel hands on my neck starting to choke me. I try to move to wake up your dad, but nothing happens. I kept my eyes on her, listening to her story to hear every word. I am no stranger to the supernatural, and I know ways to keep things away. This angered me, that something in my family's home was hurting my mother. I tried to calm her down and assure her she would be okay. "Mom, come sleep in my room tonight. I'll stay up and watch you as you sleep, and I'll see if I can catch it. I have a little dog named Princess. She was a very good dog. She would sleep with me in my room, and she would always growl when she felt danger, tangible or supernatural. Through the night, she would keep watching me all the time, and she made me feel safe. That night, my mother came into my room, laid on the bed, and I told her to sleep, reminding her that I would be here so that she doesn't have to worry about anything. It was around 10 p.m., and she finally fell fast asleep. I stayed up right next to her with my dog in the middle of us. The dog soon fell asleep too, and at around 2 a.m., nothing had yet happened. So I got up to use the bathroom. As I was coming out of the bathroom, I looked at my bedroom door, which I kept open just in case, and that's when a dark shape ran past inside. In my head, I thought, well, here we go. I walked back into my room and closed the door behind me. I laid on the bed and waited for anything to happen. Before long, I was getting bored since nothing was happening. I lay on my stomach with my hand holding my head. I let out a long breath. I folded my hands and I laid my head on them, facing away from the door. Not even 1 second passed and I heard my door open. I had a quick conversation in my head, and it was something like this. "Did something wake you up? Maybe my little brother. He must have woken up." As I was saying this in my head, I felt like someone was shaking the bed, but only by our heads. They were shaking it in a way as if they were testing to see if a person was awake. I said again in my head, "It must be my little brother. I better get up to see if he's okay." But when I tried to move, I couldn't at all. My head, my hands, I was completely frozen. The moment I noticed I couldn't move, I began to feel something climbing on the bed and on top of my mother. My heart began to pound, and I was thinking of what I could do. I felt something like a leg on the side of me from this thing that was on my mom. The bed felt like it was sinking in the middle, and whatever this was had its foot on my dog. My dog didn't even bother moving. It didn't make a noise this whole time. I thought in my head saying I had to do something. I need to think. At that moment, my side began to feel like it was on fire. It hurt so bad, making me lose focus on trying to think. But I pushed through. I ended up facing my fears and panics, and also became committed to prayer. but I couldn't believe it. I couldn't remember any prayers at the moment. I couldn't even make one up. I was blocked. So I looked at my hand that was close to my face, and I tried to focus on it, saying in my head, "Open your hands. Just open it." I tried and tried, but nothing was happening. I kept saying it over and over. It felt like hours now, but I needed to fight this and save my mom from this evil spirit. But then I felt the top of my fingers. I took that and began to try and open my hand fully and slowly. I could feel it moving as I felt my hand open just a bit. This thing jumped off my bed and ran out of the room. I heard my bedroom door slam shut, and I could finally fully move again. I looked at my mom, and she was okay with it. I let out a sigh of relief, and tears just started flowing again. My mom woke up asking what happened and why I was crying like that. So I told her, "Let's get the fuck out of here." So she and I went to the living room, and I told her everything that happened. After that, she looked so scared as I finished the story. We heard something that sounded like something running on hard wood. We looked up, and it was coming from the attic. But this time, it sounded like it was trying to get away. And then, it was gone. We didn't know what it was that was haunting my mom, but after that night, it never came back. And my mom thanked me for helping her. Amen. I'm gonna start off this story by explaining that it's not mine. I'm just the one who wrote it all down. I'm not Denye, the actual name of the Navajo, and this is how I'm gonna refer to them from here on out. I have never lived on a reservation, and I know very little about their folklore. I was actually in between of believing all these paranormal things for a really long time, until something happened to me a few years ago that made me into a believer. Nothing to do with skinwalkers or things of that nature, but it definitely made me believe in ghosts. This story was told by my Denia friend Sam, and comes from his own experience. I met Sam on a photo gig a few years after graduating art school, and we connected through our shared interest in the paranormal. We would tell stories about our personal paranormal experiences. All names have been changed at Sam's request for privacy, and I'm using a different account. Sam also gave me permission to write this, and fully cooperated with me as I put this together. According to him, he's too lazy, and I have too much time on my hands, so he was fine with me putting this together for him. Sam is a full-blooded Denie. His mother and father grew up in the nation near New Mexico. They had Sam at a very young age, and broke up a few years after he was born. His mother moved back to Illinois with his now stepfather, who is white and Catholic. Sam grew up in Chicago suburb and lived the most of his childhood and teenage years there. He would visit his dad for a couple weeks a few times a year, but never really spent a huge amount of time out on the res. It was at 20 that Sam moved in with his dad on the reservation. He said to get a better understanding of his heritage, as he said it, and stayed there till he was about 24. He was very interested in his Denia heritage, especially when he started developing his art practice as a painter and photographer. As he spent more and more time on the res, he grew a deep interest in Denia superstition. I guess as a way to connect to his culture that he felt he didn't do enough to be a part of during his childhood and teenage years, since he was raised in Midwestern suburban white culture because of his mother and stepdad. While on the res, he made friends with and eventually dated a girl that we're gonna call Jess, who had fully grown up on the res. She was a little older than Sam and got her teaching degree in another state before coming back to the res to teach high school. She was basically agnostic, but had a very superstitious family. In fact, her great uncle, who we're gonna call John, was a medicine man. I'm not really familiar with the details surrounding this practice, and Sam also didn't talk too much about this, but basically, He was a very respected elder and was extremely superstitious. He often spoke of Dania folklore, creatures, magic, etc., and took it all very serious. John was pretty old and often needed help around his property, so Sam was quite often over there helping him out with odd jobs. Sam felt weird taking money from the old man, especially since Sam already had a part-time job as an art teacher and sold his paintings and photos in Santa Fe art markets. So as payment, Sam would ask John to share some of his knowledge with him. It was Sam's way of connecting to his heritage. He told me that they would talk for an hour or two every night that Sam came over to help. Sam would basically grill him on every random, Dania-related thing under the sun, and would generally get an earful about it, except when it came to one specific topic, Ginadroshi. Sam, having spent most of his childhood with his mom and stepdad off the res, didn't have the same outlook on skinwalkers that other Dania did. The whole thing about not speaking about them wasn't something he subscribed to, mainly because A, Sam grew up in the Chicago area where no skinwalkers would be around anyways, and B, he was raised Catholic and didn't believe in Dania superstitions. He was pretty interested in this part of Dania culture because of how common skinwalkers were on the internet. So naturally, his interest in them disturbed John, and he generally shut down any discussion of them. She got visibly upset and told him to never speak of them to her or her great uncle ever again. This was really weird to Sam, since Jess wasn't superstitious or even religious for that matter. He thought that his agnostic girlfriend wouldn't be so weird about these things. She explained to Sam that, despite her being agnostic, that was one thing she knew was real, because she and other members of her family had experiences. She told him a very similar story to the types you'll see posted online. Late at night on the res, driving home, and seeing what you think is a coyote or a sheep following you at a great speed, only upon closer inspection, see what appears to be human underneath animal skin, or a half man, half coyote kind of creature. This happened to Jess when she was a little girl, while being driven home by her father. Great Uncle John came and performed some sort of protection cleansing ritual that they thought would cover them, at least for a few years. It wasn't until Jess moved back after gaining her degree did she encounter one again, this time running along the rooftops of some homes and buildings in town. She thought somehow someone's dog got up on their roof, but it would then get on two legs and jump to the next building. After landing, it would stay up there, sitting cross-legged, staring at her with yellow eyes. She ended up speeding home so fast that she got pulled over by the tribal police. When she explained what she saw and why she was speeding, the officer told her to be quiet, tore up the ticket he was writing, and told her to get her ass home. Uncle John came by again and performed the ritual. Jess said that according to John, the creature wasn't after her and was caught in the act of stalking someone else. That made it set its eyes upon her, so she was to be extra cautious. And this is why she stands firm by the words of, "Shut the fuck up about them forever." She only told Sam all of this to keep the things off her and her family. But wouldn't you know it, that just made him more interested. And who could blame him? It seems as though Sam kind of whittled down John's resolve on the issue, because eventually, the old man budged a little bit. He revealed to Sam a few bits and pieces of information over the years. I'm just going to copy and paste from some Instagram messages he sent me. Please note that the only changes I made to his messages were the names of those involved. Also, in case it isn't obvious, Sam likes to abbreviate Skinwalker to SW. The first thing John told me about Skinwalkers was that they can't actually read minds like they say in the stories and stuff. It was basically what you'll call an old wives' tale because they didn't want their kids talking about that shit and spreading the idea that this was something people could do. I actually think they wanted the practice of being skinwalkers to die out completely, so they thought by forbidding people from talking about it, nobody would be curious enough to try out black magic and shit. I think because Denia are so steeped in oral traditions that they basically believed if enough people stop talking about a thing, it dies forever. But you know real well that you can't tell people not to talk about something. So they said that if you talk about skinwalkers, it will make them interested in you and seek you out. It was just them trying to scare kids. The other thing is that they are just regular people, not monsters. They don't have any special powers. They just know a lot about certain things that a lot of us don't. Like how there are things you know how to do as a video guy, for example, that regular people who never done it don't. Like when you show them a really cool edit you did or shots you pulled off, and they're like, how did you do that? It's the same kind of stuff. They just spend a lot of time learning about stuff that makes them able to do what they do. They studied animals and how they move, making suits, studied poisons, shit like that. They're actually medicine men just like John. In fact, a lot of them are openly good medicine men in the community, and nobody knows they practice this stuff. It's just another form of their medicine men stuff, but they use it for people who want to harm or scare others, like they get hired to fuck with people. John told me this one story about a close friend who was also a medicine man in the city area that had an asshole in the neighborhood who kept bitching about his property lines or something like that. He was building a fence and there was a big fuss about it. The guy was harassing the shit out of his next door neighbor because of it, but the neighbor knew where his land started and ended, so he didn't budge. Eventually, some weird shit started to go down. The asshole's neighbor was talking about how there was a giant coyote in his backyard that would look in the windows at night and scare the fuck out of him and his girlfriend. He would hang in his backyard with a shotgun around sundown, which of course would weird out everyone in the neighborhood, and a lot of folks were saying that he was mentally unstable. But then people in the neighborhood started hearing fucked up noises, and someone saw a coyote stand on its hind legs and look in the windows. Then one day, the guy's girlfriend drove him back to the emergency room because he was having a really bad trip apparently, hallucinating and talking about this coyote man who was saying that he was gonna kill him. John doesn't know what he was on, if it was some kind of drug or something. He came down a few hours later and a lot of people in town laughed it off, but John's friend and a few other people in the neighborhood, like I assume the ones who actually saw the coyote man, knew that it was most likely a skinwalker fucking with him. John said that skinwalkers know a lot about medicine, how to get the results they want from them, and how to administer them to victims without them knowing. Like they know so much about the compounds and shit, that they know exactly how it will affect you, and how to fuck with you when you're on them. So John's friend came by to bless the place, and perform a ritual, and the weird shit stopped. Because skinwalkers are medicine men themselves, they also believe in the power of the rituals that are used against them. That's how I would say these things work. Nothing super magical or paranormal about it. They just have strong beliefs and know what to fuck with and what not to. Anywho, so he thinks that this asshole neighbor got a skinwalker on him to get him to move out of town or something like that. The last thing John told me for a really long time was about how skinwalkers were actually good guys at one time. They created that whole practice to fuck with the colonizers. They protected other people and scared away anybody trying to take the land. But some started using the practice for their own gain, and once the treaties were signed and we got land back and all that, they just started using it to do bad stuff to other Dinya. After this, John basically closed the door on the skinwalker talk. Sam told me he thought it was weird that John didn't want to talk about them. After all, John said it himself that skinwalkers can't read minds, and talking about them didn't draw their attention to you. As Sam said, it's an old wives' tale. He even told this to Jess, but she shot him down. She actually kind of insulted him apparently, telling Sam that he's not a real Dinya, so he doesn't understand. And him trying to get into this deep skinwalker stuff was actually offensive to their heritage. And that's part 1. I will be posting the second part soon, which will begin to cover some more elements of skinwalker lore that I thought was a lot more interesting than what John initially led on. I realized that the last post presented a grounded, realistic idea of the skinwalker. But this is where we start getting into some real supernatural shit. And because of that, I do want to say everything with a disclaimer that what I'm about to tell you, I cannot verify. I am not Denya, and I know very few folks who are native, much less culturally native. I don't live anywhere near the Four Corners either. This is all from the recollection of one Denya friend of mine, who is retelling stories and information given to him by a much older man. Believe what you can, or take everything with a grain of salt. I hope it's a fun read. I'm warning you, it's much longer this time around. After learning the truth about skinwalkers and being scolded by his girlfriend, Sam took the clue and for a while focused his time spent with John on things the old man actually wanted to talk about. Sam learned a lot about his culture and the practice of medicine man, and worked on this gorgeous 4x5 portrait series of elderly folks on the res. Sam told me that it was around this time that he realized he was pretty cautious in the way he approached the skinwalker subject. He was just a dumb kid raised in white America who thought he was being curious about his native culture, when actually he was spending more time chasing scary stories than actually learning about his people. By the time Sam had been living on the res for about 4 or so years, he even got a full-time teaching job at one of the reservation schools. He moved out of his dad's place and got his own. Sam always had planned to move back to Illinois or to some bigger city with more of an art scene, but wanted to spend much more time on the res, at least another 5 years or so. Despite that desire to stay and his new job, he and Jess ended up moving to my city only a few months into his full-time position. And that's around the time that I actually met him. His usual response to why they both left was that he needed to be somewhere with a bigger art scene and community, and Jess wanted to go back to school to get an MSW. But it wasn't until I got to know him well, and we started bonding over our shared interest in the paranormal, did he actually tell me why they left. Here are the DMs that he sent me. John was getting up there in age, late 80s. The guy lived a long life, had some cancer in his 60s and beat it, but he would tell me that he always wondered when it would come back to take him. I think it was like in 2014 or something. As a side note, Sam moved to the res in 2010 and met John a few months after that. So he was diagnosed with lung cancer that spread to his liver, colon, and he was only given a few months to a year to live. Fucking sucked to hear because we were basically brothers by this point. For being as old as he was really sharp. After being diagnosed with cancer, Jess, her father, and Sam spent a lot more time with the old man helping him around the house. At this point in his life he was only in bed and had refused to be put in hospice care as he thought it was a waste of the family's money, for as Sam put it, a more comfortable way of dying. A few months in, Sam received a call from John asking him to come over that evening. And here's the message from Sam. He told me that he had some stuff he wanted to tell me that he didn't want to die with him. I assume he felt like he was on his way out based on that. I packed my recorder in case he was okay with me recording him. When Sam arrived, John was just sitting in his porch, watching the sunset. He beckoned Sam to sit next to him and told him that he had some last bits of knowledge to share with him. When Sam mentioned that he brought his camera with him, John allowed him to film, with his only request being that he wouldn't show it to anyone, and that he would stop recording when he told him to. This is what Sam sent me. We spent like an hour or so just talking about whatever came to his mind. It was a lot of stuff like I told you before. Stuff like parts of the reservation that are cursed, pathways or portals to other dimensions, and then stuff like how to bless your home, what plants do what, how to find your way home if you're lost in the desert. Also some songs and prayers that I had to have on tape because it was in the language, and I'm actually trash at it. It was like he was trying to cover everything he felt like he hadn't told me before, as he never actually passed on his knowledge to one before. He said he was keeping some knowledge for himself, but he still wanted to share what he felt comfortable with. It was here that I asked Sam why John would tell his great-niece's boyfriend from Chicago all of this, if it's supposed to be secrets and stuff that stay within the Denia people. It's a little bit different than that. Like I did a lot for him, renovated his home, built him a patio, even helped him get internet, and gave him my old MacBook and showed him how to use it. I gave him my old Wii, and he became fucking obsessed with Wii Sports. Pretty sure he felt like he owed me because of everything I helped him with, and I always refused to take a single penny. I get why it seems weird, but also I feel like he didn't have anyone interested enough to just sit down and hear him talk for hours on end. So I guess he appreciated me for that or something. Or maybe he was actually just fucking with me, but I doubt it. He was pretty sharp in his old age, and also was a genuine guy. After the sun went down, John requested that they turn off the camera and go inside. Once inside, he told Sam to turn on the TV and raise the volume. He explained that it was important that no one hear their conversation. According to Sam, the old man didn't have any neighbors for miles, so he actually found that strange, at least until he learned what their conversation was about. I haven't been honest with you about Yinadroshi, he said. He then requested that Sam burn some plants, herbs, mixtures of some sort that he had to put on top of the logs in his fireplace. This was so that, according to John, no one in this world or the other could hear them. It seems, and this is just Sam's reading of the situation, that John thought by writing skinwalkers off as just assholes who dress in animal skins and drug people with shrooms to fuck with them, he would discourage the young man from ever looking any further into the legends. And while that was definitely true, there were skinwalkers who had no powers, no connection with the supernatural, and were just Denia fanatics who played dress-up. That was only part of the story. Yinadroshis exist in two different natures. The first kind, John had already explained to Sam. Medicine man with no actual supernatural powers, just a very extensive knowledge of various medicine compounds, able to craft very convincing outfits of animal pelts, and can move and behave very similar to whatever animal they wish to mimic. These folks were accessible to the general population on the res. When I say accessible, of course, I don't mean just anyone can seek them out. It takes someone well connected. These skinwalkers would often receive monetary compensation for their deeds. They based this entire practice on the legends of the shapeshifters and dark witches in Denia folklore. This explains a good portion of skinwalker stories and lore that you see posted online. Large coyotes or sheep behaving strange, only to, upon closer inspection, reveal that they are a person wearing animal skins. But what about the other stories? The stories of these creatures, half man, half beast, pulling off unnatural speeds around the res, running alongside cars at top speed, mimicking voices, reading and even controlling minds, immune to firearms, shape-shifting into incredibly convincing, terrifying wolf-like creatures, glowing red or yellow eyes, and faces that are not human or animal. Well, you guessed it, those are the real Yinadroshis. Powerful, dark witches who have scared the Denia and sometimes others for centuries. John said that skinwalkers developed around the time when the first colonizers arrived. Medicine men and the tribes were incredibly cautious of these visitors, and as time went on, they revealed themselves to be conquerors. The medicine man, as Sam put it, turned to the dark side. In order to scare them off, medicine men back then knew that by turning to the practice of black magic, there wasn't really any turning back. Black magic robs them of humanity and corrupts their souls, but they believed that they could do this for the good of their people, and then, once the colonizers were driven out, be dealt with by their own people. In fact, some medicine men revealed their plans for this to other members of their practice, who opted not to participate in the rituals. They gave them detailed instructions on how to protect themselves, and even kill them when necessary. Unfortunately, we know how this turned out. And now, we have the unique Denya problem of the skinwalkers. And unlike the other skinwalkers, the pretenders in animal fur, these Yinadroshis are not human, or at least not in the sense that is recognized by the Denya. In order to become one of these things, they must participate in a ceremony that essentially robs them of their humanity, and after a long enough time living as one of them, they barely even resemble a human in appearance. Think of the Wendigo, a creature that was once human, but through some horrific, twisted process or ritual, became something else. The practice of being a skinwalker is guarded, even more so than that of the pretenders. It requires committing horrible acts, murder, or torture of a family member or friend, ingesting poisons and human flesh, and communicating with entities from other dimensions. Skinwalkers are also a people unto themselves, an isolated subculture of the Denya that branched off a long time ago. Even though they make their home in the same region as the Denya, they generally do not live among them. They are a completely separate community. John did not go into great detail on the process of becoming a skinwalker. He said no man who calls himself Denya would ever know such things. That might have been true a century ago, when skinwalkers still lived among the people, but in this day and age, the skinwalker is much too concerned with being found out, and so they isolate themselves, and brought all knowledge with them. Think of those tribes that are still being discovered in the jungles of Africa and South America, completely cut off from the rest of the world. Only this tribe is aware of the rest of the people and actually chooses to isolate. That all being said, of course, they still do go out among the people. It's just always at night, among only a small group of folks, and only for their own dark purposes. Exactly what skinwalkers gain from their behavior towards the Denya is disrupted among medicine men. John's understanding was that, aside from stealing livestock, their abilities feed off the fear that they instill in others, and to their connection to whatever dark entities. But somebody dying directly at the hands of a skinwalker is extremely rare. John then went on to say how a lot of things that are sometimes attributed to deaths of despair, such as suicide, overdose, alcohol poisoning, etc., could be traced to very powerful skinwalkers. It's said that a basic trait of the skinwalker is being able to instill fear in their victims, like a weak form of mind control. More powerful skinwalkers can actually cause folks to harm themselves. However, John wasn't sure if the mind control rumors were true. The powder of a corpse, the fabled favorite weapon of the skinwalker, blown on their victims' faces, could actually be how they make these things happen. While some say that the powder of a corpse is a powerful poison that slowly kills over the course of a few days, leaving no trace of itself in one's system. I heard of things like this before. Criminals in some parts of South America use something similar to make their marks essentially empty their bank accounts for them. John believes in both of these explanations. It is sometimes a cocktail of poison and human bone, and sometimes it's a drug, and the Skinwalker uses this to instruct the victim to harm or kill themselves somehow. Having contact directly with their victims is too risky, both for the individual Skinwalker as well as their clan, and is likely frowned upon. When a Skinwalker does physically kill someone, the person either disappears or has their body found much later with their death ruled as an animal attack. John says that this is more common among weaker Skinwalkers. One detail that stood out to Sam was the idea that Skinwalkers communicate with other entities from other dimensions, and he pressed John on this a bit more. In Sam's words, he knew I was raised Catholic, so he explained them to me as basically being demons. I don't remember what it was, but even if I did, I most likely couldn't spell it. They are evil, inhuman spirits that try and come into our realm, or dimension, or plane, or whatever, but don't exactly have a physical presence, so they possess people. Or in the case of Skinwalkers, they use them as their connection to this world. So some Skinwalkers do the bidding of demons, and in return, the demons give them powers. But John also said that some really old Skinwalkers aren't even people anymore. They're only living as empty vessels, but demons live inside them. I guess the idea is that demons give them powers in exchange for letting the demon possess their body by using it as their flesh puppet after they die. According to John, they communicate with these beings through their knowledge of the portal system in the America's Southwest. This included places that are off the reservation, even though Skinwalkers are careful about going off the res, as it can be more densely populated, and carries with it a risk of being discovered. The few times they do, they are good at keeping a low profile, being actual shapeshifters and all. But because of their nature, they can't resist feeding off the fear of others. So small groups of campers and people driving alone at night off the res have stories as well. Sometimes lone visitors outside the reservation, but that are close to a portal, who are off camping, hiking, will straight up disappear under weird circumstances. This may be a stretch, but this reminded me of David's missing 411 research. I highly doubt Skinwalkers are to blame for the majority of these mysterious disappearances. But what if John is saying is true? A few of them could have possibly fallen prey to one. These portals often exist in caves and small canyons, and require a full ritual, offerings, dances, and a sacrifice to open. What the sacrifice is, John isn't sure, but he guesses that disappearing hikers may have something to do with it. When the portals open, they are used for different things, communicating with spirits and demons, gaining more power, summoning other entities into our world, or even throwing themselves or others into the portals and leaving this world. Sam asked why they would go into the portals and what existed beyond them. It was another dimension that allowed them to observe our world, but not interact with it, as well as see things and beings that we cannot see or interact with in our own plane. He said that they would interact in that dimension with these things called Chendis, which are the evil spirits of those deceased, said to be a manifestation of everything that was bad about a person. They would send Chendis out to not only harm others and spread illness, but also report on which people were growing wise to the Skinwalkers. This was where the belief that Skinwalkers are not to be discussed come from. Chendis can listen to your conversations and report back to the Skinwalkers who commune with them, and then using portals, show them where the offending individual lived. It was very important to the skinwalkers that much of the general population know nothing about them, their culture, their practices, and most importantly, who they are. Nowadays, of course, because skinwalkers isolate, protecting their identities was not as crucial, as anyone who saw their original forms would never be able to recognize them, as they were not members of the community. But John noted that there were select skinwalkers who would live alongside the communities, and sometimes in them, as a way of feeding off others' energy without directly stalking or scaring them. He told me a little story about this group of folks who lived near a weird old witch. This was back in the 1980s, I think. She would come into town but never buy anything from the stores or the markets or anything like that. Just walk around, stare at people. One day, a guy and his wife went into one of the cities off the rest for the weekend, and while they were at a restaurant, they saw her looking through the window at them. I actually painted this scene a while back, so they were wondering how the fuck she got out there, and it scared the shit out of them, like she just lived in a hogan and she didn't even have a car. She ended up disappearing, and that night, the wife had a dream that the old lady had gone down on all fours and turned into a fucked up looking coyote. On their way back to the res, the next evening, they saw what they thought was an injured coyote on the side of the road. The husband was gonna get out to see what was up, but the wife made him stop. The coyote was looking straight at her, with the same stare that she saw in the old woman's eyes. It leapt up on its hind legs and ran off. The next day, the wife told everyone she could that the old lady was a skinwalker. Rumor has it that the old witch got sick and died the next day. Do take notice of the words, rumor has it. Many people believe that if you learn and tell others of a skinwalker's identity, it can spell disaster for them, and is one of the few ways an average person can kill them. However, this is only partially true. It weakens the skinwalker by not only robbing them of their prey, but it doesn't kill them. But what does actually kill them? Other skinwalkers. According to John, the woman did not die of a random sudden illness. She simply left town. He believes to go back to her local skinwalker community. However, the next day she was found, not far from her own hogan, dead and mauled by a pack of animals, wolf bites, bear claw marks, and even evidence of being trampled by a horse were found on her body. When the authorities found the body, a local medicine man, whom John actually knew, instructed the police to say that she died of an illness. He wanted people to remain unaware that a community of skinwalkers was in their midst, so no curious, stupid folks would go looking for them. And that's part 2. I'll post part 3 tomorrow. Their part will go into detail on why Sam left the reservation. So again, full disclaimer, I cannot verify any of these stories. Believe what you can, or take it all with a grain of salt. So if skinwalkers are, say, for a select few, an isolated group, how do they add more to their ranks? They used to be easier to join, like if you were a medicine man and knew how to find them, and had completed the first ritual on your own. They will let you go through the rituals and train you. You have to complete the first ritual before even looking for the skinwalkers. That way they know that you reached the point of no return. John said that he didn't know the actual rituals, but he assumed it was the part where you kill a close friend or family member, so you couldn't really go back to your regular way of living, and so you robbed yourself of your humanity too. It's how they know that you're real. Otherwise, they just kill you on the spot. John told Sam he had no idea how skinwalkers recruited. The most likely scenario would most likely be kidnapping someone very young and grooming them to murder the family they were taken from, or choosing to share their knowledge with people that the demons have scouted out as a spirit and potential addition to their ranks. It should be noted that according to John, pretenders almost never became real skinwalkers. No info on why. Sam and I guess that they most likely want the pretenders to do their thing and continue to exist, to throw folks off their trail. Finally, John had one last piece of information to share. Yes, these skinwalkers actually did transform into animals, and it was often to varying degrees of success. The more skilled skinwalkers could mimic an animal perfectly, to the point where you wouldn't be able to pick them out among a pack. But the issue is, a normal old coyote or sheep isn't scary if it looks and behaves exactly as it should. So skinwalkers on purpose transform into imperfect or unnatural creatures. Things such as larger size, weird proportions, even human features mixed in. One story that stood out to me in regards to the way skinwalkers present, mainly because it had to do with the infamous Skinwalker Ranch. My personal least favorite skinwalker story because it sounds so ridiculous and is barely even about actual skinwalkers. Okay, so first of all, let me say I think Skinwalker Ranch is mostly bullshit. John's heard the stories and says it's white people crap. People say its land is cursed by Denye because it was stolen from us and they think we got a skinwalker on it. But we know that's not possible because they exist separate to the Denye and we can't summon them. But there was a skinwalker on the land. Several, most likely. A tribe of skinwalkers that just refused to leave. So people said it was a Denye curse. But most of the crazy UFO shit just doesn't track with me or John. Maybe some of it because Denye have seen shit, but I don't know. A lot of it sounds bunk. But anyways, the reason I bring up Skinwalker Ranch is because one of the stories from the white people who lived there was that they saw this big ass wolf, like bigger than any wolf in existence, the size of a horse maybe. This was actually true, I'm sure of it at least. They most likely added the UFO stuff for fun, because just saying you saw a big wolf isn't a crazy enough story. But this wolf is an example of how they'll become a real animal. But they'll add some detail that doesn't add up, or doesn't look right, and actually makes it 10 times scarier. And sometimes the transformations aren't perfect anyways, and they keep it that way instead of trying to perfect it. There was this other story I heard online, most likely about a guy who saw a giant Doberman looking thing with yellow eyes, but looked like it had bits of flesh hanging off, almost like a zombie dog. I don't know how true the story is, but it does point out this characteristic. What happens when a skinwalker absorbs the skin of the animal they kill, but it's not a perfect animal, or the skin has started to decompose before they absorb it, but it looks scary as fuck so they don't mind. I bet some of them even wait for the flesh to rot before it's absorbed. What Sam is talking about here is how they transform. Basically, they can only transform into animals they kill themselves. They must skin the animal and cover themselves in the pelt, often while it is still warm and bloody. After a certain period of time, the animal skin will be absorbed by the skinwalker, and not only will they gain the ability to transform into the animal at will, but some of the features of the beast will begin to show in the skinwalker's human form. This is how many older skinwalkers, as they age, begin to gradually lose human features, only to be replaced with more animal ones. Their human skin ages, even decays, while their animal skin does not, remaining in the same state it was when they absorbed it. This is where the stench of decay that many associate with skinwalkers comes from. It's the human being, rotting. John began noticing that the fire was dying down, and it was getting late. He told Sam that he is not to speak a word of what he was told while on the reservation. The only way in which their speech was protected from the prying demons was the mixture in the fireplace, and the blessings that John had performed earlier in the day. The loud TV was there just in case anyone, human or skinwalker, was in the area and walked by to listen. He gave Sam a small wooden box filled with the same mixture he threw on the fire, as well as a few other various things that John said would protect him. He told Sam not to take his possessions of these things as some sort of free ticket to talk freely about skinwalkers. However, he said something about how he had many decades of experience in these matters and felt safe. Plus, he was gonna die soon, so if a skinwalker took him out of his misery, so be it. Sam didn't have that luck, so he needed to walk on the side of caution. Off the res, he was free to blab all he wanted about the shapeshifters, because as Sam said, who the fuck would believe me anyways? The next day, as Sam was getting ready to pack up and leave school, he received a call from John. "Shouldn't have told you that stuff," he said, and then told him not to come by the property for a few days. He assured Sam that he had everything taken care of and was safe, but wanted to be sure. He hung up before Sam could even get a word in. He let Jess know what her great uncle had said over the phone, and naturally, Jess had to know what it was John told him about. Sam, hesitating, told her point blank that John had given him more info on the skinwalkers. He did not go into any level of detail on what it was John said, out of respect for the old man's wishes. Jess, according to Sam, went pale. It's so weird seeing your partner, who you know is a big skeptic, get scared by something like this. But I guess it just goes back to being raised in you, hearing these stories and stuff. Also, just because you're agnostic doesn't mean you just don't have some belief in the paranormal. She told me that John most likely attracted someone's attention by talking about that shit, but that we have to trust that he knows what he's doing. And then she told me I can't speak a single word of what I heard, and I am never to ask or even allow John to tell me anything anymore. She said something like words have power. You're not culturally den yet, so you wouldn't get it. She laid into me a bit after that. I was kinda insulted, but in retrospect, she was right. It hurts to hear, but I think we all gotta take a step back. But Jess, alarmed as she was, put her trust in John and told Sam that they weren't to contact or visit his property until he said everything was okay. But that day never came. 2 nights later, Sam and Jess were awoken by a phone call from Jess's father. John was in the hospital. His body was taking a turn for the worse. The two rushed to the hospital, but John had passed away of a heart attack before they got there. For a while after John's passing, Sam, Jess, and their families lived in a pretty uneventful life. Sam thinks it was a period of about 3 or 4 months of relative calm. Jess had started looking into getting an MSW out of state, and Sam was grappling with a decision of whether or not he wanted to stay on the res or follow Jess wherever she would go. I asked Sam if there was any tension between him and Jess because of everything that happened, but he said they both sort of dropped the entire argument about Sam messing with Skinwalker knowledge. He does not think that Jess attributes what happened to John as a result of bringing Skinwalker attention onto him. After these 3 to 4 months of calm were up, strange things began happening to Jess's family members. Her father, mother, and younger brother all complained of a group of coyotes that ran around their property, keeping them up several nights a week with their noises and scratching on the side of the house. Her father had taken to standing on the porch with a shotgun some nights, but he never saw anything. Her cousin complained about missing livestock. They would completely disappear, but every once in a while, the corpse of a cow would be found a few yards from the property. Sometimes it was a cow that was missing days earlier and looked only freshly slaughtered. Then one night, Sam was staying over at Jess's house. While they were having dinner, Sam noticed it had gotten quiet outside. He told me it was windy outside, when all of a sudden, the wind could not be heard. And that's when he actually heard something tapping on the window. Jess pointed at the window behind Sam. When he turned around to look, he caught a glimpse of a figure for only a split second before it vanished. But he could hear it walking away from the window as the thing was very close to the house. The two were frozen in fear for a few seconds before the sound of the wind returned. They drew the blinds. Sam said they barely slept that night. Jess told him that she saw a large wolf with glowing yellow eyes looking into their window. She said it was a weird looking wolf and that it was smiling, almost like how a man smiles. There was a row of yellow teeth that looked strange like human teeth. Jess found herself in the coming days bothered by this. She told Sam it reminded her all too well of the two beings she saw all those years ago. They had someone come by the property to bless it, and that was that for everything that transpired at Jess's home. A few weeks after the incident, Sam was awoken by a series of noises. The noises, he said, started far away, but were loud enough to wake him up. He said they grew in volume as they grew closer. He estimated that there were about a minute or so in between. Each noise was getting closer. From far away, they sounded like your typical wolf or dog, but as they got closer, they sounded more bizarre. As he said it, it's really hard to say exactly why these noises were so scary. Like, I was shivering in fear. Wave after wave and after wave of chills, dude. My eyes were watering. I felt like I was having a panic episode. They didn't sound like any animals I knew. It started like a wolf howl, but then made weird gurgling noises that went on for a few more seconds after. The noises were really loud at the front end, violent, like they were a warning. Suddenly, Sam heard a noise from inside his own home. He tells me he grabbed his pistol from his closet and burst through his bedroom door, only to see an empty house with the front and back doors wide open, swaying in the wind. Looking out the back door, he said he saw two wolves running away in the moonlight, but their gait was off, as though they had the wrong set of hind legs. The next day, Sam dialed the medicine man who blessed Jess's place. He was an old friend of John's. When he came by, he first listened to Sam's story and then inspected the home. The medicine man, in a sort of roundabout way, told him it was indeed a Yinadroshi, and that he had caught the attention of something very old, very powerful, and very evil. In fact, the medicine man had never heard of any being of the sort to actually enter another person's dwelling place. That fact alone terrified the man, enough to where he said, I don't know what my blessing will do. Best case scenario, it'll keep it off your property. It won't keep it off you. Worst case scenario, it'll make it mad. I thought, shit, well, it was worth it just to try for the possibility of it working, I guess. How fucked up is all this? Sam also showed the man the box of items that John had given him to see if they held any significance. The man frowned, saying he didn't wish to speak ill of the dead, but John had made a small error in giving Sam what he thought were things that would protect him. The man went to his truck and came back with another item. Sam won't tell me what the items were. This is out of respect for the Dinya traditions. He also says that he didn't even know what half of the stuff was. So the medicine man told Sam to put that with the other things. but that it was no guarantee. He said there was no one-size-fits-all solution to warding off dark witches. Witches, which by the way, is how he refers to skinwalkers. So witches are superstitious, but some more than others. Some of them have learned that certain practices don't do anything, so they just laugh those off, while some others find it actually disrespectful. Finally, he performed a blessing. He told Sam that if things don't improve, he may need to get help from someone else, or multiple others. And then he gave him the info of some other medicine man whom he trusted. He closed out by saying that John was most likely the best person. He knew how to deal with these things, in spite of the slip-up with the items he gave Sam. That night, Sam said he was sleeping peacefully, which continued for about a week. Then one night, Sam woke up to use the bathroom. He didn't switch on any lights, but noticed two very strange things. For one, it was freezing. We live in the desert, but it's never been that cold at night, that time of year. And I didn't have the AC on because I'm not a diva like you. And also, it fucking reeked. His house smelled of rotting flesh. After using the bathroom, he went back to bed and then had an incredibly vivid dream. 6 tall, lanky, skinned men in animal pelts, wearing skulls with bits of flesh still clinging to them. He remembers them clear as day. 2 appear to be dressed as wolves, one as a sheep, one as a coyote, and another as a deer, with broken antlers. They were standing around all glaring at him, with striking yellow eyes. They barely moved. In the words of Sam, they looked like people who hadn't eaten in weeks, almost zero body fat or muscle, and one of them did not look well. The deer man, I'm talking about gray skin, infections, almost like a zombie. It was disgusting. Sam woke up in a cold sweat. He told me that in the dream, he was just standing there as their eyes bore into him. He actually knew he was dreaming while it was happening. His first and so far only instance of lucid dreaming. He told me of how desperate he wanted to wake up, but he couldn't. When he left his room, he saw 5 sets of footprints in dirt. There were no footprints leading to where they actually were, just 5 sets of footprints, as though something had just appeared and disappeared in one spot out of thin air. There were also 6 men in his dream, but he never found the other set of footprints, assuming that these prints belonged to the man in his dream. When he told the medicine man about this, he was rightfully baffled and terrified. He told Sam to call the others, but that he doubted the effectiveness of their practices in light of the information that he shared. He still offered a blessing, which Sam accepted. Sam did indeed make a few calls and told several other medicine men about what happened. They told him that something very dark had set its eyes on him and that he was to be very cautious. He basically lived with Jess until the semester ended, only going home to grab something every once in a while. Sam moved back to the Chicago area for a brief period before Jess started her first semester for her master's in another city, where he joined her. That's around the time we met on a gig while he was working as a freelance photographer. Whether he left or not because of the encounters and the dream, he's never really actually said. I know he was looking to live in a city with an arts community, but I do think the encounters were the straw that broke the camel's back. Sam says that he doesn't know if he wants to return to the res, but he still goes every now and then to see his dad. I'm sure the skinwalkers miss him greatly. It was late June of 1968. My dad was 12. My grandparents had moved a few months earlier from Tucson, Arizona to Concho, Arizona. Concho was very different, both in landscape and temperature. Sitting at 5,000 feet above sea level, the summer temperatures were around 70 degrees versus the hundreds in summertime Tucson. Resting at the edge of the White Mountains, the land is red, yellow, and brown sandstone cliffs and buttes against a larger ancient basalt flow ridge that lines the north from the Springville Volcanic Range. Well, Old Concho, as it's referred to now, sits among the high desert, with large basalt ridge bordering the east and north. In the valley, a dry riverbed was dotted by large cottonwood trees. The buttes and ridges boasted large twisted cedar trees. Only about 200 people lived in Concho at the time. It's in pretty close proximity to the petrified forest. Therefore, petrified wood was found on the valley floor. There were also numerous ancient Anasazi ruins scattered along the valley. My great-uncle had moved his family to Concho as well. My grandpa had recently finished his engineering degree, and he and my great-uncle were doing highway construction all around the White Mountains. They had both purchased land in the Concho area for pretty cheap. My great-uncle had 2 sons who were a year older and a year younger than my dad, Tony and Zach. Tony was 13 and Zach was 11. They would spend their days exploring the surrounding landscapes, joined by my dad's American bulldog, Sarge. They had found quite a few ruins, numerous pictographs, and some old abandoned homesteads, most likely from the 19th century. Every morning, they would load up their bags with canteens, bologna sandwiches, and head out into the wilderness to play and explore. My grandparents and great aunt and uncles had only one rule that was for the children, and that was to return by sunset. As my dad recalls, on one summer morning, they ended up hiking towards the edge of the giant basalt ridge to explore. After going for about a mile or so, they came upon an arroyo running adjacent to the ridge. Large black boulders and giant slabs of sandstone peppered the wash. The banks were pretty steep, but they would have to cross it if they want to explore the ridge on the other side. They made their way down slowly. Once in the arroyo, they realized that the opposite bank was too steep to climb, so they started following it west to find a better place to climb up. My dad said as soon as they got into the riverbed, he started getting an unnerving feeling, like they were being watched. He said it was extremely quiet, no birds or cicadas chirping. It was hot as well, no breeze stirred the air. The further they walked down the wash, the more a sense of urgency began to build in his gut. He didn't say anything though, for fear that his cousins would laugh at him. About a half mile or so down the wash, it made a bend around a large volcanic boulder. Suddenly, Sarge began a low growl, hair standing up on his back. This actually startled all 3 of the kids. Looking around, they didn't see anything, so encouraging the dog, they moved closer to the bend. Sarge stayed rooted to the spot, growling and barking. All 3 of the boys began to get scared. They agreed that maybe they should just turn around. They noticed that there was a spot where they could climb out of the wash. They hadn't noticed it at first, but it looked almost like a game trail. With adrenaline fueling them, they hauled ass up the side of the embankment towards the ridge, the dog darting after them. The whole time the bad feeling was growing stronger with my dad. They stopped at the top to catch their breath. Sitting against a large boulder, they took some drinks from the canteen and assured each other that Sarge probably smelled a coyote or spotted a rabbit. Here,
the game trail was more apparent. It had even worn into some of the volcanic and sandstone that protruded from the ground. They noticed that there were a lot of petroglyphs dotting the black rocks, geometric shapes, animal, human figures. There were so many. Finally, they found a large juniper with a trunk and ate their lunch in shade. Bellies full and excitement replacing fear. They hurried along the trail as it slowly zigged and sagged the side of the basalt ridge, avoiding large areas of rock falls. The pictographs began to change as well along the trails. Lots of spirals and horn-looking men. My dad even said there was one that looked like a UFO. Turning around a bend, the trail disappeared. Only open space of the edge of a cliff. There was nowhere else to go. The cliff dropped off to one side, and a sheer cliff going up about 50 feet on the other side. My dad, he was disappointed, but also a little relieved, as the sun was getting further west, and they were pretty far from Concho now. They could see the town in the distance, as well as the holy mountain and mesas that dotted the distant Navajo res. Even though they were disappointed, they decided that it was worth looking at the view. They started making their way down the trail when they spotted an opening in the cliffside, a side canyon. They hadn't noticed it on the way up. It was behind a large twisted cedar. The tree's shadow had hidden it. It looked almost like there was another trail going into the divide. The opening was about 4 feet wide. Looking at it, that unnerving feeling returned to my dad. His stomach dropped and he felt like it was twisting in knots. The hair on the back neck stood up. Tony suggested that they should detour and check it out. My dad protested, saying that they needed to get back. Zach stayed silent. He looked as scared as my dad felt. Tony laughed when looking at them and called them both sissies. He said if they didn't want to go, it was fine, that they could wait there for him and be babies if they wanted. That's when Sarge ran down the trail and was out of sight. My dad whistled for him, but he didn't return. Zach decided he would follow Tony, so my dad stayed behind while they entered the narrow black-walled canyon. When they moved out of my dad's field of vision, the wind picked up, blowing through the canyon and trees, making a creepy sound. It was quiet except the wind, and my dad thought he heard faint voices on the air. He shivered, the ominous feeling growing stronger. 10 minutes passed, then 20, and still, Tony and Zach had not returned. A large cloud had covered the sun, and drops of rain began to fall. My dad moved under the cedar to get out of the light rain that began to fall. He sat on a rock and began to shiver. Suddenly, something grabbed his shoulder. He jumped about 3 feet and screamed. Then he heard laughing. It was Tony and Zach. They looked extremely excited. "Luke, you'll never believe what we found," they said. "We found some Indian steps and they lead to a cave." They begged my dad to come see. It wasn't far, only about 10 minutes into the canyon. My dad ended up following them, knowing they weren't going to agree to go home until they showed them. Plus, he felt a little braver and more intrigued now. Sure enough, around a bend, and about 20 yards into the canyon was more wide, about 20 to 30 feet across, and there were indeed foot and handholds carved into the rock wall. My dad had seen steps like them before, when his parents had taken him to Chaco Canyon National Park. They were smaller than the ones in Chaco, and only went up about 20 feet to the darkened mouth of a small cave. He shivered, from excitement or fear, he wasn't sure. From the bottom of the canyon, there was no way of telling how large the cave was. They dropped their packs and decided to use the foot and handholds to climb up to the cave, against my dad's better judgment. The rain had stopped, but they slowly and carefully made their way because the rock had become slick. It took about 10 minutes to ascend. My dad called for Sarge from the top again, and the dog still hadn't returned. The cave was much larger and deeper than they expected, and the entrance was decorated with hundreds of petroglyphs. The light didn't penetrate very far in, but they could see light in the distance from an opening in the roof, so they entered. Light adjusting to the dark, they started to notice that the ground was covered with objects. What looked like rocks and debris now revealed itself to be pots, beautiful, painted pots of all shapes and sizes, black on white, painted with geometric patterns, and animals, red pots and even some yellow ones, large pots holding dry corn and crusty squash and beans. There were also pots filled with arrowheads and beads. They even found some instruments like drums and flutes. They didn't touch anything and kept walking deeper into the cave. They looked around in shock and in awe. They had just discovered something big, something very big. They moved now towards the second bit of light streaming in from a crack in the roof. The cave was littered with all sorts of artifacts, stone axes, pots of all shapes, colors, and sizes. As they passed under the crack, they noticed now that there were objects in alcoves in the wall. My dad moved closer to one, and his blood froze. He was looking at a human body. It was decayed skin and hair clinging to patches and its mouth open in what looked like a silent scream. He took a leap back. Tony and Zach also froze. The walls were lined with alcoves filled with dressed bodies, lining the walls as far as they could see into the darkness. Suddenly, an ominous and horrendous screech broke the silence of the cave. All three boys jumped, and my dad, looking in the direction from where the sound came, saw two red and glowing eyes. He froze, locked in place by those glowing red eyes. Suddenly, the cave was washed over with the stench of decay and death. The eyes began to move towards the boys, slowly. Another hideous growl, screech, jolted them from being petrified in place. The eyes were moving fast now, right towards them, and they heard what sounded like running footsteps. They turned and tore out of the cave as fast as they could. They ran as fast as their legs could carry them in a blind panic. The entrance to the cave was maybe 30 yards away. My dad looked back against his better judgment and saw a man on all fours, or a giant coyote, he can't be sure. He pushed himself faster, screaming for the others to also run faster. They reached the edge of the cave, having to turn around to scrabble back down the foot and handholds. Zach got there first and began descending as fast as he could. Tony was next. His face turned into a wash of horror as he went down. My dad's heart was hammering into his brain by now. He turned and saw the eyes only about 20 feet from him. The stench of decay was overpowering. It made his stomach turn. As fast as he could, he placed his feet in the first set of footholds and started clambering down the rock face. He could hear the creature's breath now, and even feel it. He refused to look up as he was going down, trying to concentrate on the hand and footholds. He heard Tony scream from below him, and looked to see Tony lose his hold and slip about 5 feet from the bottom. He landed on his side and began to scream with pain. My dad slowed himself a bit, still not daring to look back up. After what seemed like an eternity, he leaped from the cliffside down the last 2 feet. Zach was helping Tony to his feet, and Tony was frozen looking at the cave and ancient staircase. All the color gone from his face. My dad was in full panic, and not looking, grabbed Tony and helped Zach drag him away. They flew down the little canyon, Finally, before they passed the turn, my dad looked back to see the red eyes watching them from the darkness. Another screech rang from the cave, and at that moment, Sarge in a full run came from around the bend, growling and barking. He ran to the foot and handhold staircase and bellowed up that cave, the hair on his back standing straight up, snarling and growling. The sounds of the dog filled the canyon. As my dad turned the corner, he saw those red eyes retreat back into the cave. They emerged from the small canyon and stopped briefly to catch their breath, the sounds of Sarge barking and growling echoing down the canyon. Tony at this point was now crying, his face washed with pain. His arm, he said. He thinks he broke it. Zach was silent. My dad was then asking Tony if he could make it home. Tony responded he sure the hell wasn't staying anywhere near whatever that was. Suddenly, a shrill cry came from the canyon. It was a dog, in pain. "Sarge," my dad cried, but Tony and Zach had started running down the trail. My dad screamed again, tears coming from his eyes. There was no response. It was quiet. My dad thinks he hears something. He looks up to the canyon entrance. It sounds like drums. My dad sits there confused. Drums? What the hell? Is he losing his mind? The drums are getting loud. Is this in his mind? Where is Sarge? He can't leave him. My dad sees Zach tearing back up the trail. "Luke, we have to go." The drums are louder now, and he can hear faint chanting. Zach grabs my dad and jerks him to his feet. "Don't you hear that?" He screams and shakes my dad. "We have to run, now." My dad is woken from his grief, as fear washes over him again. He runs down the trail with Zach. Tony is waiting at the edge of the arroyo, waiting for them. The wash is now running, about 6 inches deep. They notice for the first time that a large thunderhead has developed to the south. A huge, large black storm dominating the southern horizon, lightning flashing in the distance. A new source of danger crosses my dad's mind. He tells Tony and Zach they need to cross the arroyo as fast as possible. If it floods, they will be stuck on the side with the basalt ridge, with whatever that thing was. They make their way down carefully and slowly. Tony is having a hard time because of his injured arm. They now start hearing thunder rolling across the air, and the wind has increased. My dad is keeping a close eye on the creek, which has only risen a couple of more inches. They make all the way down and across the creek. The place where they crossed is only 30 yards or so ahead, so they scrabble their way towards it. The water starts rising now, at an alarming rate. They start going as fast as their legs will carry them. They're exhausted, but keep pushing on. Suddenly, my dad, who is in the rear, starts to hear loud splashing coming from behind him. His heart drops. It followed them. It's getting closer. He closes his eyes, bracing for impact. That's when he feels something lick the back of his swinging hand. He turns, bracing for impact, and sees Sarge. Joy fills my dad. He bends down and gives Sarge a quick hug as the dog runs past, and the dog bounds after Tony and Zach as they climb out of the arroyo. My dad runs and begins to climb. When he's almost to the top, he hears crashing and loud snapping coming from the arroyo. Making it to the top, he sees a wave of brown debris filled water crash through the wash. He falls to his butt and watches as the flash flood fills the little canyon. Tony and Zach are lying on the ground, gasping for air. My dad tries to catch his breath. He feels dizzy. He feels tears welling up, and Sarge comes and licks his face. My dad sees that Sarge is covered with blood. He looks over the dog and finds several slash wounds on his back. His ear is also torn. They don't look too deep, but he can't be sure. Zach is the first to speak. He is asking what it was, but no one responds. Tony's arm is beginning to swell pretty badly, and it's only a few hours till dusk. They're all thirsty, and realize in their panic they left their packs in the small canyon, along with their canteens. They are no longer in a hurry. They are exhausted. They drink some rainwater that has pooled in one of the large sandstone boulders. They figure whatever that thing was, it's not going to be getting across the arroyo for a few hours. So they slowly make their way back to Concho as the thunderhead to the south continues to fill the landscape. The three boys and Sarge make it home around 8. The sun has set, and my grandparents and great uncle and aunt are worry sick. They are relieved and angry until they see the condition of the trio and the dog. The boys tell them about their horrendous tale, and Tony's parents rush Tony to the nearest doctor. That night, my dad sleeps with Sarge at the end of his bed. Despite him being extremely exhausted, he is plagued with nightmares. One that he speaks about all the time is especially terrifying, where he sees the red eyes looking in through his window. When he wakes up though, in the morning, his curtains are closed. The rain continued for 2 or 3 days. The boys don't leave their homes, still terrified of what happened. My grandpa and great uncle are convinced what the boys encountered was a mountain lion, but they are intrigued by the story of the cave they found. A few days later, when the weather is clear, they tell the boys they want to see the cave. They make the journey faster this time, using my great uncle's Jeep. My grandpa and great uncle also bring along a couple of shotguns and rifles in case this lion is still in the cave. The boys show them the arroyo, which has been filled with new boulders and broken trees from the flooding. They find the trail and start making their way up. My grandpa on the front and great uncle taking the rear. They find the boys' packs, caught in a cedar bush. They have been shredded. My grandpa figures they must have been caught by another flood, and they ended up in the trees. They finally make it to the little hidden canyon, which has been blocked by a juniper that washed down during the rain. My grandpa and great uncle get the log out of the way, and they go to the canyon to the Indian staircase. When they look up though, they can make out the darkness of the cave. The water washed away all signs of the boys' previous passage. My grandpa figures maybe at this time of day, the cave is more illuminated, so he and my great uncle climb up the foot and handholds to the top. The boys wait at the bottom, having no desire to go back up there again. It's only my dad and Zach. Tony with his broken arm stayed home. My grandpa calls down for them to climb up. They do as they are told and climb up. When my dad reaches the top, he is stunned. The cave is gone. It's only a 20-foot rock alcove next to a black basalt cliff covered with petroglyphs. He's confused, looks around. He goes over to the wall looking for cracks and sees nothing. My grandpa and great uncle end up questioning the boys. Were they making up stories? No, they weren't. Something attacked Sarge, and the boys hadn't made up being that scared. The dads aren't mad. It's a neat area. Maybe some other weekend they will look for the cave again. My dad and Zach know that this is where the cave was. There's no doubt in their minds. They found their packs and even passed by the UFO petroglyph, but they can't convince the adults, so they make their way to the Jeep that is parked on the far bank of the arroyo. As they load up, sun sinking low in the western sky, my dad looks back at the black basalt ridge, wondering if maybe it was all just a dream, but something in the shadow of a cliff catches his eye. He squints against the sun and sees 2 red shining eyes looking back at him. His blood goes cold. He turns around as the Jeep pulls away. My grandparents only stayed in Concho for another few months. As soon as my grandpa finished the highway project, he got a job offer in the U.S. Virgin Islands. My dad said after that encounter, he had nightmares every night and would swear that at night he would see the red eyes outside of the house until they finally moved from Concho. After he moved, he never had a nightmare about the eyes again. But it wasn't his last encounter with the red-eyed creature. He would see it again when he became an adult. But that is a story for another time. I'm pretty new to this, but I just had to get this out there. I have to tell someone about this, and I felt like this was the best place to tell people. This all started when I used to live in a small town in Arkansas, with a population around 5,000 plus people. It was a typical average, conservative town. In the summers it was hot and humid, and in the winter it was dark and cold. I grew up on Southern entertainment, driving four-wheelers, and hunting every deer season, and maybe some small trapping here and there. But this happened during my last year of high school. I was 17 at the time. I had a girlfriend, lots of friends, and a shabby 1972 Ford pickup that I still have to this day. Anyways, it was November. Rifle season had just started, and I had been getting ready for it. My friend, his name is Drew, and I had been planning this trip for months, and we had everything ready. It was Friday, the end of the week, and the start of the weekend. Our plan was to hike up through the national forest, onto the mountain and set up camp and just have a good time. I wish I could have done something to have stopped myself. I woke up at 3 in the morning, leaving a note for my parents and putting my things in the bed of my truck. I hopped in and drove to my friend's house. He was already waiting for me outside. I got out and said in a whisper, "You have all your things? I don't want to forget anything." "Yeah, I checked again before you got here," he said. He put his bag in my bed and put his gun in the truck, and we took off to the mountain. I had my eyes fixed on the road, and Drew was sitting there with a metal click. And I looked over and he was flicking a lighter on and off. "What's that?" I said, putting my eyes back on the road. "Oh, it's my grandfather's lighter. He had it with him all throughout the war." We then turned and went through the entrance to the hiking site. The change from road to dirt was just as familiar as ever. We stopped and got out. We put on our bags and headed up the mountain trails. It was around 7 and we could see where we were going because the sun was coming over the trees. The birds were chirping and I could see the squirrels running through the trees chattering. 3 hours of hiking later, we came up the campsite that we followed with our map. When we got there, we quickly set up our tarps, and we were quick to find firewood and to start a fire. I told my friend that I would get us some lunch, and I headed off with my rifle to go get something to eat. I walked for at least half a mile south, and found myself breaking the tree line. I decided I would sit and watch for a bit. I sat underneath a large oak tree, and looked for any movement. The sun was rising slowly. I was sitting there, when all the birds stopped for a moment. The silence was deafening. The sharp ringing in my ear was eerie. I scanned slowly with my eyes only, staying as still as possible. That's when I saw movement across the field. It was hard to make out. I slowly raised my rifle and looked down the hill. A deer had poked its head out of the tree line. I only saw its head and neck from where I was at. I knew it was risky to take a shot, but I also knew I wouldn't have another chance to bag another deer. Regardless, it was a doe anyhow. That's when I noticed something. The deer's head was higher off the ground than most deer should be. I felt like it was watching me. It slowly turned to the left. I could only see its neck and shoulders, and I could hear leaves crunching as it moved deep into the dark forest. A little nervous, I decided to head back to camp. I followed the mental landmarks that I saw the first time. A tree that had fell over, dried up creek bed, and I could see the tarps in the distance through the trees. When I got back to the campsite, we decided it was time to catch up on some sleep. I crawled into my tent and got in my sleeping bag and fell asleep. We got up early that morning. It was still as eerie as it was the day before. It just felt so weird, different. No animals in the area, just silence. It was strange. The air felt heavy. There were no birds anywhere, no deer, rabbits, or anything. Not even any crows crying out. We were getting hungry, and when the sun set, we nestled down waiting for some game to come around. It soon grew dark again, and we decided to come together and to make some beans that I had packed just in case we didn't catch anything. As we were getting everything ready, my friend Drew got up from his seat and said, "I'll be right back. I gotta take a piss." I sat there drinking my water, watching the fire dance. After some time, I noticed that Drew had been gone for a while. That's when I started to get concerned, and I heard leaves crunching, and I jumped and looked towards where the sound came from, and it was Drew. However, his face was pale. "Dude, come over here," he said. "What's over there? Just come over here and look," Drew said as I got up to follow him into the darkness of the forest. As I was walking, I started smelling something horrible, something pungent, and it got stronger and stronger as we walked deeper into the woods. The smell was so bad, and then, as I was walking, something fell on my shoulder. I turned my head to see what it was, but the smell of death made my stomach churn. I leaned over and started to throw up, while this thing that was on my shoulder fell to the floor. It hit the ground with a sickening, squishy sound. I pulled out my light and pointed it to the ground. I got confused for a second when a drop of blood fell on my hand. I looked up and my heart skipped a beat. What I saw was disturbing. The guts of an animal, limbs, pieces. A squirrel that had been impaled on a branch. What was left of it, at least. I looked at the face of Drew, still drained of all color. His mouth was open, eyes wide. "Dude, what the fuck?" I said. And that's when we just ran and bolted back to the campsite. How did they get up that high in the tree? Why were they on the branches? "Maybe we should leave," I said. "I agree. I don't want to stay here anymore, man," Drew said. We started shoving our food and things back into the trail packs. That's when we heard crunching a few yards away from us in the pitch black darkness of the forest. And Drew aimed the shotgun at the sound, and I slowly raised my rifle. I pulled out the mag light and pointed it to where we heard the sound. We were about 8 yards away from where we heard it. I flicked on the flashlight, and a deer was leaning, its head out beside a tree next to some brush. With some relief, we lowered our guns, and that's when the deer suddenly fell to the floor. The deer's head rolled down the hill and stopped in front of us. Something had ripped or chewed the deer's head off and rolled it down the hill. But that wasn't the reason I was scared. Someone had been holding the deer's head. And then everything clicked. The bones, the guts, and other miscellaneous parts of animals hanging on the dead tree branches. And that's when I looked up, and a grotesque, elongated hand came from around the tree. We bolted down the hill. I didn't care about our stuff. They could be replaced. We faced in and out of running and jogging. We had our lights and we were looking for a landmark. Anything. Something. That's when I remembered that before we came to the trail, there was a big sign with the words, Washita National Forest. I made that a point in my mind and looked around for it with my eyes. My lungs were burning. My legs were in pain, but I kept running. I would glance back and check on Drew and how close he is behind me. I turned off my flashlight, and so did Drew. We laid up against a tree, still as possible. I could see the breath of Drew, frozen in the moonlight. My eyes finally adjusted to the dark, and I looked over at Drew and turned on my light. An arm long and bony, covered in blood, it sank its nails into the shoulder of Drew. Immediately, Blood started spewing out. He started screaming in pain, and he was lifted up, screaming louder and more painfully. He was slammed on the ground. He looked up at me, his eyes filled with tears. He was dragged through the forest, screaming, taking shots with his shotgun. With every shot I could see his silhouette, moving further and further into the woods. I ran. I just kept running, and that's when I tripped over something, and I started falling down the rest of the hill. I slammed up against a tree. I stopped and my back was in pain. I realized it was quiet again. There were no crickets. Nothing. Just silence. My eyes already adjusted to the darkness. I could see through the woods. In the distance, the moonlight was shining through the trees. I lay still as possible, and then I heard some shuffling, and I saw that thing moving through the woods. It was strange, jagged, and tense. I can't even describe it. It just felt wrong. It was tall and thin. Its bones were rubbing up against its skin. It seemed very malnourished. It shifted back and forth as if it was looking for something. When it turned its face, the grace of the moonlight revealed its features. It was disturbing. It had an elongated chin and small eyes, dark folds of skin around them. The skin was darkish gray. Its mouth was large. It spread all the way across its face. It had its teeth jagged and broken. Its mouth and nose was covered in blood and also in chunks of meat. The blood trailed down and covered its torso. I was about 10 yards away from it, and it crawled on all fours. It started to come towards me. Closer and closer. I could smell it. It smelled like roadkill. That's when I threw up in my mouth and held my breath. My hope at this point was that my death would come quickly. I still had some hope that I would make it out alive. But suddenly, this thing started speaking.
James, James, James.
In the most ungodly voice I ever fucking heard. The part that made my hope disappear was when it started saying my name in my friend's voice.
James, James, James.
It wasn't just like his. It had two tones, one deep, and the other, my friend's voice. It kept saying this and it crawled away through the woods, back up the hill. I stayed there for I don't know how long. I cried silently, and for some reason, I started moving my hand around, and I found something. It was cold and rectangular. I looked closer. It was the lighter that belonged to Drew, and my flashlight had broken on my fall. I stood up slowly and grabbed my bag. I turned and slung it into the woods and ran towards the parking lot. It started screaming my name, but this time, it sounded demonic. This time it was no longer my friend's voice. I kept running and I didn't recognize anything. I flicked the lighter of Drew and scanned the area. My hand ended up hitting something. It was a sign, and with the lighter I read, National Forest. I looked back and heard that same screech, and I ran through the tree line. At a distance I saw my truck. I ran as much as I could, and when I got there I flung the door open and jumped into my truck and started it. I flipped my gears, pulled out, and hit the gas flying out of that parking lot. As I drove, I looked back, and God, I wish I hadn't looked back. It had broken the tree line, and it noticed me driving away. It stopped in the light of the parking lot, now shown in detail. It fucking stood tall. It was at least 9 or 10 feet tall, and its face, I'll never get that picture out of my head. It looked angry, and its eyes were full of hate, and what I assumed at the moment, hungry. I put the pedal to the floor. I tore off the side road and onto the highway. I looked at myself. My jacket was torn and ripped. I was covered in dirt and had cuts and scrapes everywhere. I pulled up to the police station, and according to what information I had gotten, it took a while for the cops to stop me from screaming about that it had killed Drew. A bunch of men got together the next day and rounded up a search party, with the sheriff leading the search. I ended up refusing to go. They scaled through the mountain and searched for my friend. It was nighttime when they found him. He was barely recognizable, they said. They found him under a log. His eyes had been ripped out. His tongue was forcefully pulled out. His arms and legs had been mauled. He had been gutted, and his genitals had been cut off. And his face, they told me his face was scratched and seemed to have been chewed down to the bones. And his neck had been broken in so many places. I can't even express through here how terrible I feel for running and not trying to help him. I still remember his tears streaming down his face before he was dragged away from me. On paper it was reported as a bear attack. After the incident, my grandfather came and talked to me. He said, "I'm so sorry about what happened to your friend. All the people in my town know the existence of that thing. I heard countless stories of local hunters that have came across it." It's been about 8 years. I'm 25 now. There is not a day that passes that I don't think of my friend. He was my best friend. I'll leave you with this warning. If you ever go camping, be careful and keep yourself armed. I never want something like this to happen to anyone. I don't even wish that experience on my worst enemy. However, I still go hunting to this day, but I warn you, never go into the woods in Arkansas. During winter, you may just find something out there that you don't want to find. And it may just be a mental thing, but sometimes at night, when it's really quiet, I can hear my friend calling my name. For the past 18 years, not including 3 years in college, I lived in a remote part of the Appalachians. Phone service is virtually non-existent at my house, and using the internet requires a 30-minute trip to the local library. Even though the area is isolated, I always consider it a peaceful and safe place to call home. With so few people around, there's nobody to commit crimes in the first place. Home is a vast expanse of rolling greenery, which in the fall becomes a wild display of reds, oranges, and yellows, like the embers of a slowly dying campfire. I never could have comprehended the horror that this breathtaking landscape could conceal until last night. As a senior pre-med student, I got a busy schedule, endless hours of labs and class, followed by nerve-wracking evenings spent trying to be accepted somewhere. When I saw an opening in my calendar, I felt compelled to return to the primal beauty where I grew up. Thankfully, my lovely girlfriend of 2 years also had an open weekend, so I felt a surge of excitement at the prospect of sharing my home with her. We took off to the mountains late Friday afternoon with our windows down, bathing ourselves in the crisp fall air. After about an hour of driving, the mountain I call home came into view. I shifted my car into four-wheel drive and we began the long crawl up the rocky trail that can be loosely termed my driveway, you can say. We gradually went through the depths of the forest until my house came into view. More specifically, my guest house, located about a quarter mile from my main home. The guest house is the home that we keep clean for company, a stark comparison to our more cluttery main home. A gentle rain fell as we brought our bags inside. My parents greeted us and we enjoyed a brief home-cooked dinner with plenty of small talk and laughing. Around midnight, my parents let us be and we made ourselves cozy. A city girl her whole life, my girlfriend is fascinated by the outdoors and animals. More specifically, she loves listening to the mournful noises of coyotes. Naturally, being a mountain man, I long ago mastered the art of screeching realistic noises that coyotes make and even barks. On most nights, I can easily draw some lonely pack of coyotes to respond back. We huddle around my bedroom window and I let out a few of them. My girlfriend looked at me as I tried making the same loud, ridiculous noises that coyotes make, and then we waited for a response. Nothing. I tried again, and nothing but the echo of my own voice responded. Maybe it's too cold, I thought, or a cold rainy night the coyotes are most likely huddled inside their cave, trying to sleep away the rough weather. But then suddenly, something answered. Coyotes can make strange sounds, but this was different. A shriek echoed up the hollows, almost human sounding, but too high pitched and piercing in tone to be produced by a human. I gasped. My girlfriend hopped up in fright. What was that? She then asked in a nervous voice. Maybe it was a bobcat. I howled again and waited. Again, the shriek split the cold, foggy air of the forest, though this time it was much closer. I reached for my flashlight and shone a beam of light through the depths of the mist-filled air. I swung the beam around, searching, and just at the edge of the beam, I saw something unimaginable. As a keen student of biology, I have some knowledge of animals, and this was something different. It was standing on two legs, covered in patchy hair, and its feet was that of a deer. Its upper body was almost humanoid again, covered in patchy hair. The skin of its stomach clung tightly to its exposed ribs. On top of this anorexic-looking frame was a head that looked once human and at once animal, with branches of sharp antlers coming out from the back of its head. This creature started walking with its bony legs, and it seemed to be making its way to the front porch. Go the fuck upstairs, Anna, I told my girlfriend. Anna sprinted out of the room and went up the stairs while I grabbed my trusty shotgun, which was attached to the porch, and shined my light through the window on the door. My beam was met with eyes that would scare the soul from your body. The eyes were empty and pale, but they were alive with a sort of ancient energy, and they gazed straight through my terrified, adrenaline-soaked brain. The walls of the house reverberated with a deafening explosion as I began unloading my shotgun on the door and my flashlight fell to the floor. It almost seemed pointless to be shooting at those eyes, but they stared at me with such a demonic and otherworldly aspect that I could not begin to understand their motives. Screams punctuated the roar of my 12-gauge thunder, screams from both the creature and my partner hiding upstairs. The eyes vanished. Silence then came, as the roar of the shotgun had moments before, and I called my parents from the home phone. Hey, some night you had, right? My dad chuckled in the morning. Yeah, never seen a bear that close to the house, I squeaked out. Yeah, I'm kinda pissed about the door, but a bear like that can't be left alone. Poor Anna. Too scared to stay the rest of the weekend, my dad said. So we're back at school and I have no idea what to do. My parents would think I was crazy if I told them the truth behind this weekend, but I can't leave them there with that thing. Something that paranormal doesn't seem as though it would die at the volley of a shotgun. Maybe posting this on here will actually help me clear my mind and figure out how to deal with this. What do you all think? Let me know. This is one of the scariest experiences that has ever happened to me. Even simply by writing this, it brings back so many nightmares. And it reminds me as to why I will never go camping again. I had been attending Camp Rock Water for about 4 years now. I used to love camping, being able to see some new faces, getting to do fun and exciting activities. My favorite was the river rope swing. I never wanted to leave that swing once I got on. I was just so excited to go back, mainly because it would be my last year I went. And then summer finally came, and it was finally time to go camping. When I got to camp after a 4-hour car ride, I was so excited. I was remembering all my old favorite places. First things first, my mom had to take me to the lodge to get signed up. When we got into the lodge, there were a lot of people there. We waited in line until it was our turn to sign up. Before we were handed any papers, the lady at the table told us that there had recently been some weird things going on a few miles down through the woods from us. I just brushed it off and ignored it. I think I was just too excited to finally be able to go to camp again. My mom helped me lug my suitcase to the cabin. When we got there, I was so happy to see some old friends from last year. Kyle was one of my longtime camp friends. He was sitting in a corner making his bed. Jacob, another one of my really good friends, was on the floor taking stuff out of his bag. And who could forget about Brad? He was putting stuff in the closet, like baseball bats and golf clubs. As for the other two kids, I had no idea who they were, but they both seemed to like me. It turns out they were brothers. Their names were Brandon and Nathan, and it being their first year here, they were kind of nervous. We all got settled in, and after our parents left, we sat down and started talking about past adventures in camp. It wasn't for another hour that our cabin leader arrived. When he got in, he kind of looked at us all with a gloomy face. He turned to us and said, "Hey guys, I'm your cabin leader for the next 2 weeks. Now, before we do anything, I have to tell you that some things have changed, and we will have to be more cautious due to the weird things that have been happening." We all were a little uneasy, but we wouldn't let that stop us from having the best summer ever. The day continued on as normal. We introduced ourselves, played some cards in our cabin, went outside and played basketball, went to the mess hall to eat, and came back to the cabin to sleep. It was kind of strange that there were only 6 cabins full of people, when there's always around 30. So the next day we woke up, it was raining hard. The sounds of the rain smacking the metal roofs of the cabins echo off to the distance. The camp leader was nowhere to be found. So we kind of sat around the middle of the cabin, just waiting for our cabin leader to get back. We then started talking about some ghost stories that happened around the camp. Some of them seemed completely stupid, but others were kind of scary. And just to let you all know, outside of our cabin, there were about 400 acres of woods. In those woods, there were some obstacle courses, the chapel, and the river. There was one more thing in the woods that nobody really knew about, because it was so far off. It was the original Camp Rock water cabins. There were only a few of the older cabin leaders that knew about it and how to get to them. They say that back in the early 1900s, when the camp was first established, 2 kids got into a fight in their cabins, and one kid killed the other in his sleep. He had apparently taken a heavy rock and dropped it on the other boy's head. Legend has it that the presence of the boy who was killed is seen walking around the old campground and chapel. They say that the boy can sometimes be seen crying at the back of the chapel. Someone even said they went to the cabins and saw his head peeking out from one of the windows. At this point, everyone in our cabin was really scared. I swear, Brad was gonna have a panic attack. That's when our camp leader came rushing in through our cabin door. He told us that we needed to pack our things and go to the lodge. We would have to call our parents in the morning to tell them to take us home. We walked all the way from our cabin to the lodge in the rain, completely wet. When we got there, only 4 other cabins had been there. As I was sitting next to the fireplace with my cabin mates, we overheard people talking about what was going on. Someone had said that all of cabin 6 had gone missing after returning from the chapel. The conversations after that got really boring, that we ended up falling asleep in the lodge. Later that night, I woke all of my friends. I wanted to go and check out what happened in the woods. Call me stupid all you want, but mind you, I was also younger. Though at first all of my friends didn't want to go, they still agreed to tag along with me. We grabbed a few flashlights and snuck past the cabin leaders that were sleeping near the exit. When we got outside, it was still raining, but now it was also pitch black outside. This still didn't stop us from heading over to the woods. When our group finally got to the mouth of the woods, Brad and Jake just couldn't do it. They walked back to the lodge through the shortcut in the gardens. All that were left were Kyle, Brandon, Nathan, and I. We walked slowly through the path that leads to the chapel. Every now and then, we would trip over some uprooted trees, but we still kept going. We could see the chapel ahead of us, but we knew there was something wrong. It was very quiet. The rain had stopped too, and there was no wind, nor any kind of animal in sight. As we walked up to the chapel, Brandon, who was carrying one of the flashlights, just started screaming. He then ran as fast as he could back towards camp and dropped his flashlight. The light was shining through the chapel, and I kid you not, through one of the windows, we saw the face of a child crying. That's when we all screamed and started to run towards the camp as well. Out of fear, we lost all sense of direction and had no idea where any of us were. As we came up to the ravine that led down to the river, that's where we saw in the pitch darkness a silhouette of a small black figure that was blocking our way. Our only way out was taking the ravine. Nathan, Kyle, and I began going down the side of the ravine, and we noticed another figure. That's when I shot my flashlight down a ways, and there was Brandon, just lying dead, with his head smashed in, blood everywhere. To be honest though, it seemed like he had tripped maybe on an uprooted tree and fell down the side of the ravine, but we had to just keep running, so we left him there. We were halfway down the ravine when we could feel the sweat falling into our eyes like ocean water, and there it was again, the figure of a little boy standing at the end of the ravine, waiting for us to play with him. I told everyone just to keep running, and that's when I looked behind us, and Nathan had disappeared. He was no longer with us. I'm not sure if he took another way or ended up running a different path or back, but he was completely gone. Kyle and I kept running, and that's when I saw the old stairs coming up to our left that led back up to the back part of camp. When we got to the stairs and we were almost to the top, that's when we could hear a kid saying, "We can play with the rocks." We didn't even stop to look back. We ran all the way to the lodge. When we got there, all of the cabin leaders had been away. 2 other cabins had left to go investigate what was going on in those woods. They both went missing, and then Kyle finally spoke up. Even though he hadn't said anything all night, he did say, "I saw him. The boy just wanted to play with us." And that was it. The next morning, our parents picked all of us up, and we never went back again. Years have passed since that encounter. Kyle was booked into a mental hospital. They said for some serious mental issues that he had going on. Jake and Brad were never found, and nobody ever mentioned anything about them after that day. As for the other 3 cabins of kids, nobody ever found out what happened or where they went. Maybe nobody cares. But I will tell you this though, after this experience, I have never, nor will I ever, go camping again.